like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
A fight between billionaires to take command of the most powerful country in the world. That was Michael Bloomberg's dream. And it lasted only until the 3rd of March, the so-called Super Tuesday. That day, his candidacy flew smack into a reality roadblock after a chaotic candidacy, which had started late and didn't have any clear message. The cold hard truth was that money was just not enough. After spending more than $500 million, Bloomberg was forced to withdraw from the race. On Super Tuesday, he barely got 53 of the 1,344 delegates at stake. But let's start the story at the beginning. Michael Bloomberg is a businessman turned politician, a chameleon politician. Not clearly left or right, but he's right in the center. Bloomberg is able to relate to the entire spectrum of US voters. Initially a Democrat, later a Republican, then he went independent, and he recently switched back to the Democratic Party as a candidate in the primary race that will determine the person who will confront Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election.
And now they have a new member of the crew, Minimite.
Oh, get me off of this stage! Get me off! Get me off of this stage!
But this is not his only distinguishing characteristic. Bloomberg is something like the Bill Gates of the election campaign. Yes, he may not be the most charismatic guy in the world or the best communicator, but he always gets away with it. Up until now, he's never lost an election. And above all, he's rich. Very, very rich. But who exactly is Michael Bloomberg? How has his political career been so far? And is it fair to compare him to Donald Trump? Let's take a look.
I've worked for everything I have, so I can afford to finance my campaign myself, and then I can look you in the eye and say, nobody can buy me.
Battle of the Wallets.
Billionaire, grandson of immigrants, owner of a large company that bears his first and last name, and one of the best-known figures in the political and economic landscape of the United States. A guy who over the years has identified as a Democrat and also a Republican. No, I'm not referring to Donald Trump, but rather Michael Bloomberg.
I'm a New Yorker, and I know a con when I see one.
At first glance, they might look like very similar characters. However, this is where the similarities end. Mike Bloomberg is much richer than Donald Trump. According to Forbes, his fortune is roughly 18 times that of the current White House tenant. With a net worth of more than $55 billion, we're talking about one of the 12 richest people in the world. Let's just say that in money terms, comparing Trump to Bloomberg is like comparing a Ford Fiesta to a Ferrari. And not only that, while Donald Trump is basically a rich boy who inherited an immense fortune from his dad, Michael Bloomberg, son of a middle-class family, is a self-made man, a faithful rendition of the American dream.
At Real Donald Trump, we know many of the same people in New York. Behind your back, they laugh at you and call you a carnival barking clown. They know you inherited a fortune and squandered it with stupid deals and incompetence. Michael Bloomberg on Twitter.
After studying electrical engineering at Johns Hopkins University and obtaining an MBA at Harvard, Bloomberg made the leap to Wall Street, where he began working at Salomon Brothers, one of the big investment banks. After being fired, he founded the Bloomberg Limited Partnership in 1981. Today, it's the largest information and data company on the planet. It employs more than 20,000 people. Its terminals are kind of a window into the world of the financial industry. Through them, you can follow the price of virtually any financial product, research the numbers of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of companies, or even track oil tankers or find out where there are wildfires. However, if you're thinking of getting hold of one, you're going to have to open your wallet. A single license costs more than $20,000 per year. The difference between Michael Bloomberg and Donald Trump is not limited to seeing who has the biggest wallet, though. The truth is that we're talking about two very different characters. While Donald Trump is the king of the show, Bloomberg is something like the king of data. As we said before, we're looking at the Bill Gates of American politics. A guy a guy who dreamed of sitting in the driver's seat of the most powerful country in the world despite being 78 years old. Even so, he's not alone in that age bracket. Sanders, Biden, Pelosi. In the Democratic Party, it seems that new faces and young blood are less popular than a cauliflower burger. But now, why did he want to make such a leap? What makes this candidate tick? And above all, what type of model for the country did he have in mind? To answer these questions and to get to know this character better, I think it's time we take a look at his political career, because yes, this is not the first time Mike Bloomberg has thrown himself into politics.
Let me summarize today's announcement for our Spanish-speaking New Yorkers. Le pedimos a todos los neoyorquinos que se mantengan informados sobre el huracán Sandy.
The mayor.
With the turn of the century, and after becoming 60, Bloomberg left business and jumped into municipal politics. He ran for mayor of New York, and he won. Because despite looking almost as bland as Windows Vista, until this month, Bloomberg had never lost an election. And you know what? At that time, the city wasn't going through the best of times. New York was still in shock after the 9/11 attacks. Crime rates were rising higher than Tesla stock prices, and the municipal budget was more in the red than the Argentine government's accounts. At the time, the city was going through a severe economic crisis, and under such circumstances, Michael Bloomberg was elected mayor by the Republican Party. And I realize that being the mayor of New York might seem like a bit of a walk in the park to you. Because I mean, really, what does a mayor do? What does that really have to do with federal politics? Well, the link is plain and simple, because it all comes down to New York's municipal budget, which is gigantic. New York City is the most populous city in the United States. It has more inhabitants than 38 of the 50 states that make up the entire country, and during his tenure, Bloomberg managed a budget of nearly $70 billion annually. Now, don't think for a second that he was the typical Republican politician who bet on lowering taxes or eliminating regulations. Not at all, in fact. Bloomberg is a curious mix of American stereotypes. One of his faces is that he's a tough guy and a market pragmatist who argues that business comes first. The other is that of a fatherly politician who argues that government should work on changing people's lifestyles, even if it means doing so by way of regulation or prohibition. You see, he really is 2 in 1, a Democrat and a Republican. And that's exactly how he ran New York City. During his years as mayor, Bloomberg spearheaded 5 major policies. On the one hand, he restored order in the public accounts that went from a huge hole, a deficit of nearly $5 billion, to a surplus of more than $2.4 billion by the end of his term. However, in order to realize such an achievement, Bloomberg had no hesitation in raising taxes. Having the accounts sorted, it was absolutely fundamental. His second big gamble was rezoning many parts of the city, that is, to promote new real estate projects and convert rundown areas into new neighborhoods by changing land uses. This is what he did with the Hudson Yards project on Manhattan's west side. The area had formerly been workshops and railway yards. Bloomberg led the city council in its transformation. He changed land use, approved a lot of tax incentives, and extended the subway. By the way, the subway is state-owned, but at that time, the state had no money or desire to extend it, so Bloomberg arranged it so that it was the city that financed the project. It was the first extension of the subway in more than 25 years. The result is that today, Hudson Yards is one of the hottest spots in the city, a huge $25 billion complex with parks, office skyscrapers, luxury apartments, and shopping centers. And this wasn't an isolated case. This real estate renovation policy affected nearly 40% of the city's land and has been responsible for most of the new skyscrapers, parks, and bicycle lanes that have been built across New York. But let's move on. His third policy was to drive a radical transformation of the education system. Let me explain. In general, New York's public schools were infamous for their bad quality. Think about it for a moment. How many movies have you seen from New York where schools and high schools were a disaster? I'm sure it's more than just a few. Well, what do you think Mike did? He closed a lot of public schools in favor of so-called charter schools, that is, schools managed independently but financed by public money. And it was a success. High school graduation rates soared, charter schools were much better equipped, and suddenly many New York schools were among the best in the country. Now, remember that we said Bloomberg had two faces? For it was Bloomberg who not only raised local taxes, but also passed many regulations that improved the lifestyle of New Yorkers at the stroke of a decree. For example, he banned smoking in the city's parks, bars, and restaurants. He was a pioneer. He did it before it became an international trend. He also demanded that fast food chains report the nutritional value of all their products, set very strict regulations for tanning salons, and even wanted to ban the sale of supersized soft drinks. At the time, they were such unpopular measures that they earned him the nickname of Nanny Bloomberg and Mayor Poppins. But you know what? In the end, they gained enormous social support, and according to Bloomberg himself, the average life expectancy of New Yorkers increased by 3 years. However, without a doubt, the most controversial project of his tenure as mayor, and what his opponents have not hesitated to use against him throughout the Democratic primary, was his security policy. You see, as we mentioned earlier, when he became mayor, crime was still one of New York's main problems. To combat this, he continued with the so-called broken windows strategy launched by his predecessor, the now famous Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani. It's a strategy that proposes that crime can be reduced by creating less hostile environments and coming down hard on even small acts of vandalism or civil disobedience. For example, consider a building with a broken window. If the broken window is left like that and not repaired, this will cause more windows to be broken, and in the end, one thing will lead to another, and the building will end up being derelict and will become a nest of vandalism and crime. Another example we can think of is garbage. If garbage is just left to accumulate on the sidewalk, in the end the whole street will be filled with garbage bags and dirt, thus breaking down any basic standards of social behavior. In this way, uncivilized behavior that ends up fueling criminality would gradually escalate. That is, we're talking about strategies that aim to reduce crime by generating better environments and stamping out even small acts of vandalism. The problem was, it didn't end there. Alongside this type of action, Bloomberg launched another strategy that over the years has caused him many headaches: the stop and frisk strategy. Basically, the idea was to increase police control in the most troubled neighborhoods. And what ended up happening is that nearly 90% of those arrested, searched, and registered were African American or Hispanic people. Of course, more than 96% were completely innocent people who simply were stopped by the police due to pure racial profiling. A topic that, as you all know, is particularly touchy in the United States. A Hispanic man in work clothes driving a van, quickly pull him over! That said, the data shows that during his time as mayor, there was a significant reduction in crime rates. Have a look at this.
Stop and Frisk had a tremendous impact on the safety of New York City, tremendous beyond belief.
Well, that's how Mike Bloomberg transformed New York. But his dream, his real dream, is to do the same thing with the whole country. And that brings us here.
What a wonderful country we have. The best-known socialist in the country happens to be a millionaire with 3 houses. What I miss here?
Well, you'll miss that I work in Washington, housewife.
That's the first problem.
A different candidate.
If one thing is clear, Michael Bloomberg is not just another candidate. He didn't even have to raise money to fund his campaign. His huge wallet allowed him to cover his foray into the primaries without even ruffling his hair. And even though he started late, he hit the campaign trail with force. In the first few months alone, hundreds of millions were spent, more than $500 million in TV advertisements covering half the country, and he hired a huge team of more than 2,000 people to go out with the latest model iPhones and MacBook laptops without even batting an eyelid. But the question is, and all this for what? What did the candidate stand for? What was his vision for the United States? Well, what we've seen in New York is a good example of what he likely intended to do in the Oval Office. You see, as Mike Bloomberg has proved, he's a two-sided, pragmatic guy.
The only 2 words the coal industry fears more than clean energy are Mike Bloomberg.
On the one hand, he advocates raising taxes on businesses and the highest income earners to square the huge hole of more than $980 billion a year in public accounts left behind by Trump. He also opted to raise the minimum wage and, without going crazy, to mildly increase control over weapons. On the other hand, he promised to push for more free trade agreements, reform of the immigration system in order to naturalize the majority of illegal immigrants in the country and attract new talent from around the world. That is, he advocates giving the United States a bit of a Canadian tinge. For example, a good test of his style is found in the program to fight climate change. Unlike his Democratic opponents, his plan was not going to be a great revolution. Instead, he was basically advocating to shut down coal power plants, which is feasible, cheap, and really effective. Put another way, Bloomberg's program was basically a boring program. He didn't promise anything that would be able to ignite the masses. Neither a wall, nor heavy tax cuts, nor a Green Deal, nothing like that. It was a program that you'd probably like to some extent, but it didn't raise passions. That said, they are very realistic proposals. And the irony is that this has perhaps been his greatest weakness.
Finding solutions to tough problems is my life's passion. My skills are in building and leading teams that draw up innovative plans and then work together to implement them. I think this is exactly what our country needs in a president, Michael Bloomberg.
Anyway, that's the story of Mike Bloomberg, the guy with $50 billion in his wallet who presented himself for the presidency and who wanted to give the current tenant in the Oval Office a kick up the backside. He's a guy who makes Donald Trump's dealings in the business world seem almost like a joke by comparison. However, a weak strategy, a bad campaign, and excessive confidence in the influence of money within politics doomed him to failure. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to hit that like button if you did, and do subscribe for more videos. Please do also check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast who provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please do consider joining them, and thank you for watching.
If you want to learn more about politics and world affairs and hear some more of my lovely voice, come check out the Reconsider podcast, where we don't do the thinking for you. Find Reconsider at www.reconsidermedia.com or on Apple or Google Play or your favorite podcatcher.